Well, welcome to the show. Nick Hazer with you. Great to have your company on rather sombre sort of circumstances here. But I want to celebrate the life of the man that just said that's life. His name was Derryn Hinch. He passed away last Friday, a New Zealander. And as we go to air right now, we've just discovered that another New Zealander has passed in Sam Neill. I don't know what it is right now. We better check up on Russell Crowe, make sure that he's okay, because we don't want to see any more New Zealanders pass away, even though many of us Australians claim him as one of our own. Derryn Hinch, the human headline. He was quite the character. He was a journalist that spanned over almost 6 decades of media and communications. He really didn't have a gap or a hole where people were unaware of who Derryn Hinch was. They just referred to him as the human headline. And it's a chance to look back at some of the work that he did. I've got two amazing executive producers, former executive producers, that worked with him at 3AW. 12 years he was at 3AW, and boy, did he shake the trees in Melbourne. I've got Kate Stevenson. Welcome, Kate. And Shannon Reid, executive producer for Derryn Hinch. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Nick.
Kato, I'm going to start with you. This was almost your first gig as a producer. And I tell you what, I've known you for many years. This is not the first time that you've been on the Experts podcast, and you've got a strong media monitoring and media intelligence background. But your first gig in talk radio to be the executive producer for Derryn Hinch, oh my.
Talk about the deep end, Nick. And it's funny, actually, the first thing they do when you start at 3AW and you start as a young casual, they train you up on the phones. And actually, Shannon, they feed you to the other sharks first. So usually it's Neil Mitchell's, because that was always the toughest one to sort of be on and answer calls, and he's doing 100 things at once. But then obviously, if you're working casually, you get to have a go at a few programs around the station. And Nick, I think I've said this to you before, before you get there as well, it's like, you want a job in radio and you want a job at a good radio station. And you kind of go, when you finally get a crack, you go, it's going to be cutthroat, right? It's going to be awful. Every man for himself, and there'll be lots of egos and that sort of thing. And then you start working with these people, and especially Derryn, and it is like, there is no ego. He is exactly what you saw, except possibly, Shannon, like a milder version, because people see this kind of, worked up showman Derryn on radio.
Bravado, yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. He was, sorry, you go.
No, completely. I was just going to say, but he was lovely, and yes, as your first gig, and I worked casually for a bit, and then both of his producers left at once, and they sort of were giving people a go, and I said, can I have a crack, working with Derryn? That might be fun. And we worked together, I think, for only 3 or 4 weeks, and he said, do you want to stick around? And I was kind of going, yes. So I was like, I don't know if I know how to do this, but you're working with one of the best, who loved radio, who loved news, who loved opinion. So I really got to learn with him on the job, which was pretty amazing.
To learn with the great man on the job. And Shannon, I mean, literally the human headline. He was a walking billboard of content, information, whatever he wanted to have his target or eyes on, or what he wanted to raise with the audience. He did it, and did it so effectively. What was it like when you had to sit in there for the first time in the production room to go and say, well, here's what we're going to have a crack at? Or was it all his ideas? How many of them were yours?
It was a bit of both. And it was nerve-wracking when you first started working with him, absolutely. You'd come in with these ideas and he'd say, nah, or he'd come in and he always had fire in his belly, Nick. He had his favourite topics, and he'd often come in and he'd be like, right, I'm going to start with this. This is what I'm going with. And, sometimes I think Kate would agree. We wouldn't always agree with what he wanted to do. But he often argued the point, and he had his favourite topics like child sex abuse and other things that he absolutely believed in. So you kind of went with him on those things, but I think you often had to kind of earn his trust over time, and kind of make him see that a topic would work. And sometimes you'd argue with him about those topics. And often I remember having, arguments with him and then him saying, right, well, we've argued about this for long enough. I think that we'll probably get calls on this.
There
So,
you, there you
and that's
go.
often how it worked.
And that's the beauty of it, isn't it? It's the magic, but it's also that pre-production of getting to roll out the ideas and almost get what you might expect from an audience. You mentioned there, Shannon, obviously campaigning for victims and particularly in the child protection space and victims of really some of the most heinous of crimes ever been put on children. I mean, he was such a strong advocate. Where do you think that came from him? Is it that he just wanted to be a voice for those that didn't have one?
I think so. I think he really wanted to be a voice for the battler, and he did that so well. Like he honestly, like, I think sometimes people think that he would say this stuff or do this stuff because it was, good for ratings or good for getting a media story. But he believed it with absolute conviction. Where it came from, look, that's an interesting story. I mean, I know that he had talked about being abused himself as a child, but I don't think he ever said that he thought that was where it came from. I think he really wanted to, he really wanted to help people that had been, impacted by this.
Shannon, and Kate, that does come to that story there as a producer, because it is your job there to keep the talkback lines going, to keep the story moving, and to keep the attention of the audience. What was it like then when you were battling with Derryn as to what the story will be or the topic we should cover? Because again, if he decides to go with a topic that no one's going to call on, it just it doesn't make the producer look fantastic.
Yeah, there is definitely that. And it's interesting, like Shannon said, something like talking about child sex abuse, it's not a ratings winner, right? Like when you are doing breakfast or drive radio, you're often thinking kids in the car. What do people want to be hearing? What's okay to have on in the background? So, I think that for him was, well, I don't want to make radio that's listenable. I want to make radio that's important. But then the other angle was, and I loved Shannon saying, because he said so often, like, that it really was something you heard, well, we've talked about this, we've argued about it long enough. Surely we're going to get people with differing opinions when we talk about it on air. But every now and then, and if we were really arguing, it meant we were quite passionate about it too. So your next step was to go away and find someone to speak to him about it on air. And you wanted someone good, because I don't agree with you. So you go and do this search and you'd find someone and they'd often say, oh, is he gonna kill me on air? And you'd go, look, he doesn't agree with you, but he will listen, and I think you've got great points. So, here are the things he wants to talk about and here's what he thinks. And every now and then you'd put that person on air and Derryn would come, launch out with this blistering editorial and you could see 9 lines and they'd go bang, 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 bang. And people would be going, yes, Derryn, and they'd be ready to chat. And then you'd get this person on who was quite intelligent and, and expressed a beautiful other side of the argument. And halfway through, you'd be going, oh, we're losing him here, because he would start enjoying this conversation. All of a sudden go, you know what, like, these are great points. Actually, you know what, I don't know that I was quite right in the beginning. And you'd kind of be going, oh, this is lovely, but this is bad for me in my job, because the calls would drop off because they're like, oh, well, this is all nice listening and I'm not fired up, for Derryn anymore or against him. So it was a wonderful thing to see, because I think people thought of him as this conservative shock jock who just would take a side because, that's what he's meant to, or that's what's going to win the ratings. But he would listen and he would change his mind, which is, I think, really unusual for radio broadcasters.
It certainly is, to be listening and for that shock jock. And let's face it, he did hold that title. And I think probably the last of the shock jocks, if anything, only because of the fact that he was that passionate about the topics that he took on and he really went for it. But for him to listen to an intelligent debate and conversation and potentially change his mind, that actually suggests that the shock jock title might not necessarily be valid, only because he's actually being able to listen and actually consume it and take it in. He's changed his mind.
He was a really good listener. Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. He absolutely was a great listener.
And Shannon, who did Derryn Hinch listen to? Obviously, you as a producer, but who was his influences? Who were the people that he sort of looked to, or even took on views that he might have got through a little easier than maybe some others?
So experts in their field, like he very much valued speaking to people that knew their stuff. You know, and in recent years, when I caught up with him after being a senator, I know that he really valued that time in politics. He was quite disappointed when he lost his seat, and you know, he had great relationships with various politicians like Malcolm Turnbull and things like that. So I know that he valued people who he could trust, and he had a few people in his corner that he could really trust that he listened to.
Well, you wanted to have Derryn's ear because for the 12 years that he was broadcasting on 3AW, then went over to Sky News to do his own TV show for 2 years. I just want to share something with you both because it was a big part of my media life with Derryn is that with his Sky News show, he would use a lot of the talent that Media Stable was putting forward, and whether it come from the media board or whether he would just call in and say, have you got a good international affairs expert, or have you got a good expert in wine? Yeah, I'll take that one. Thanks, Derryn. But no, he was really after the very best of the best, and he loved new voices as well. And that's what I just wanted to share with you both, was that it seemed like he might have taken what he did on radio, obviously over to TV, and just continued to be Derryn Hinch. That's life, the human headline, I'm Derryn Hinch. Did you see any changes in his behaviour after post-radio? Did you see that Derryn Hinch was just remaining Derryn Hinch?
I think Derryn Hinch
I think
he always has been. Yeah, Shannon. Like
I think he remained as Derryn Hinch. I mean, his maiden speech in Parliament, you're only meant to take 20 minutes, and I think he took 45, and he named sex offenders. You know, like he was always going to be Derryn Hinch. What you saw was what you got. I mean, I know that over the past few days since his passing, like, there's been so many people that have said that, but it is so true. Like, you know, it's just, yeah, to the letter. He believed in everything with absolute conviction that he said. Anything that came out of his mouth, he absolutely believed.
Because you can't fake being Derryn Hinch, can you, Kate? You can't fake that passion and that energy that he brought to his broadcasting career.
No, you can't. And, you know, it's really funny. We talk about all these different facets of Derryn, and, you know, yes, had these wonderful causes and crusades and things, and, you know, people that were in his corner. And, you know, he was really loyal to people as well. Like, you know, those people we knew when we knew Derryn, who had been in his life for such a long time, which was really interesting. And so, you know, in some ways he was just really quite soft, which I don't think people would expect. And then there'd be an article in the news about, you know, the gangland types, and all of a sudden, you know, and that would be when it would be a bit more fun, right? Because when you're talking about, you know, serious issues and issues that impact people, then, you know, it is nice to listen to both sides and that sort of thing. He did not listen to both sides when it came to some of those gangland characters. And the interviews you heard, you know, and I wasn't working with him when he spoke to Carl Williams, but I was on a couple of occasions when he spoke to Mick Gatto and Wendy Pearce. And, you know, the funniest thing when you think about, you know, radio hosts and radio producers and how you have to chase down interviews and who's it going to be, and he would just have to, you know, give a little bit of Derryn on those topics, on those people, and we never had to chase them. Those studio lines would ring, and it would be them ringing in to get, because they're listening. You know, number one, you can't stand him, but you are listening to this program and you are reacting, and some of the showmanship when it came to him. If you go back and Google and listen to, you know, Derryn Hinch, Mick Gatto, and, you know, Mick basically almost threatening his life, which is, you know, what he does.
He did.
It's
I will never forget that day. That was pretty much early on in my time with Derryn, and I had come from the ABC, and I remember Derryn was talking and I was on the phones, and this picked up the phone, and this guy says, I think he said, my name is Frank, I'm here with Mick. I'm here with Mick Gatto. And I'm like, yes. And he's like, he wants to speak to Derryn. And I'm like, okay, put him on hold. I said to Kate, I've got Mick Gatto. And she's like, put him up. I'm like, okay, put him up. Anyway, that call going to air when he said, I think he said something like, I hope you, something, I hope you go to your grave, or something like that. It was, he did. It was basically threatening
Well,
Darren's
he called
life.
Derryn a maggot. And Derryn said,
Yeah,
if I go to my grave being called a maggot by someone like you, I'm happy. And he said, well, I hope you do go to your grave.
I hope you
Then.
do.
It was
That's right. That's exactly right. Yes. And I was petrified to go to my car that night. I mean, look, I'd just put the call up, but I was worried about Derryn. I was worried about Kate. I was worried about all of us. Like, walking to our car, I thought, we just had that happen. What? And then it led the news that night. It was just like, yeah, it was just a total different world to what I'd come from.
But I don't
Oh,
think for a second Derryn was worried, like it was.
No, he wasn't worried at all. I remember saying to him, are you worried? And he's like, no. It's just like, it was like water off a duck's back.
I loved seeing, there's very few characters in media that actually become part of the media themselves. And I refer to Wog Boy for the comedy for which Derryn was painting the picture there of the Wog Boy. And then in the Underbelly series where real life, I suppose that was actually real cuttings of actual radio interviews that were being conducted. They weren't, were they?
No, that was actually filmed when we were working with Derryn in Bank Street.
Tell us all about it, Shannon. What happened?
Oh, I mean, it was part of the show. They got some really, those daggy glasses. I remember they got him to wear those daggy glasses. And yeah, they came in and they filmed him. They had to make the studio look like it was authentic for,
Right.
when the actual phone call happened. Because yes, Carl Williams did call Derryn. That actually happened. But when they were making the show, they had to come in and film it.
So there's very few characters in media that can actually get away with that, or at least want to. They want to put them in the actual. He's bigger than the brand himself.
Absolutely, yeah.
So he has sort of done that in a way that, and it's amazing to see that so often with Derryn, because he was. We know that he started his life out in print. He did a lot of TV for sure, and Hinch Live was enormous. It again
Huge.
sort of did take on another a big part of the media landscape of Australia. I mean, it was enormous, and then. But with his radio and with his ability to impact and to put out there, working with him. Were you both aware what you were doing at that time working with him, that this was going to be either transformation for yourselves individuals, or the fact that I'm actually a part of history here?
I think yeah.
Go, Shannon.
You go, Kate. Oh, I think absolutely. Yeah, I remember watching the Hinch television program, and when I got the gig with Derryn, I was like, pinch myself, like I'm working with Derryn Hinch now. But yeah, I think, and we went on quite a ride together. I think he was jailed. He got cancer. He got a liver transplant. He did home detention, and he was sacked while I was working with him. So yeah, we did a lot.
That's a couple of lifetimes of media just there.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
And
definitely.
Kate, your first gig in media being that of Derryn Hinch's executive producer, you mentioned earlier that you want to do the best radio that you possibly can, but were you fully aware of what you were doing right there and then when you first started with Derryn?
So possibly not, Nick, and I say that because, and Shannon, this, like Derryn is this big figure and a beard on a TV screen, and you were aware of it because everybody says, you're working with Derryn Hinch, what's he actually like, and all these things. But when you're in there and once you're doing it and you're comfortable, it was just a really fun experience going in and making radio every day, and he really is, or he was just a lovely, easy bloke to work with. And he was so protective of his staff and loyal to his staff. I remember him taking the fall for me before when I organised an interview, and probably it wasn't great. And, maybe the content director at the time was sort of ready to give me a hard time. No, I asked for that. I asked Kate to find that person and put them on. So, that's why I'm like, oh, but thanks, Derryn. We were making radio, which was wonderful and enjoyable, but you almost didn't get an idea of the scale of it because he was just really real and made it an everyday experience,
There was a little bit of a dark side to Derryn as well, and well reported. His drinking, he seemed to a big reputation for that. And Shannon, you talked about just his liver transplant, and that was actually one of the first times I sat down and had lunch with Derryn was post that, and he actually brings his own bottle of non-alcoholic wine to a restaurant, which was very impressive. And I felt incredibly bad drinking some of the nice reds that I was, but I made sure it was okay. He was very fine with that. But he did have a bit of a troubled past. I mean, I won't go in. This doesn't need to go negative or anything like that. But did you see that, both of you, as a producer that worked so closely with him, that he had his own challenges? Shannon, I'll go to you first.
To be honest, Derryn never drank when I worked with him. I never knew Derryn as a drinker. So I know there's stories, and I know, that there have been, negative things said about him. But when I worked with him, and I think Kate the same, he didn't drink, and I never felt like he had a problem with, with drinking. So that's my point of view.
Kate?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's interesting, Nick. That's the time that we got Derryn, was the time where, he wasn't, especially well and wasn't able to drink anyway. Hilariously, so many non-alcoholic options now. And I think it was just the Eden Vale that he used to take everywhere, Shannon, everywhere we went, even our team lunches, the Eden Vale would come out. So, it's interesting, right? Like, probably we are lucky and we worked with a Derryn who, didn't have any of those issues or any of those, those bust-ups. I think we all know that there are stories and there are stories that Derryn broke that made people really unhappy, and I guess that's him, right? He was that kind of uncompromising, and there are lots of broadcasters who will have things in their lives that they haven't covered on air, because they don't think it's right. I think Derryn's famous saying was, all we owe the dead is the truth.
It is the truth. Absolutely. Yeah.
I love that.
Absolutely.
All we owe the dead
moniker.
is the truth.
It's the truth. Yeah. And that's what he always said when he was going to say something, or that was his defense for, for saying those things. And, he as Kate said, he hurt a lot of people.
Just one last thing with the sort of the dark side. I suppose with his colleagues, he also, I mean, it just naturally ruffled a lot of feathers. He didn't mind calling a spade, and he certainly did go after the story. His colleagues, not all were big fans, and I suppose that's also the difference between him and others is that he might have been prepared to go that extra mile. I mentioned the death of the shock jock because of the shock jocks tend to sort of move out of media relatively around the same time, is that we didn't necessarily need that hard hitting or what was probably a little bit over dramatic. But his colleagues, what would you say to that? I mean, would that be fair to say that he wasn't always on people's Christmas cards, Kate?
Absolutely. Look, when sorry, you said Kate, but I think Kate will probably agree with me here. When we first both started at Bank Street, Derryn and Neil's office were next to each other, production, and they wouldn't talk to us that entire program, and they wouldn't acknowledge us at all.
And that's just because of their loyalty to their presenter, and that obviously was coming from Presenter High.
Look, I think so. Kate and I didn't work with Derryn during the incidents of the David Hooks story, nor the Graham Kennedy story, which are probably the most high-profile controversies surrounding Derryn. But it was after that that I think he lost a lot of respect, particularly from his fellow colleagues at
Yeah.
3AW.
Yeah, it is interesting. At the end, his funeral will be not long from now. Are you both going to that?
I will be, yeah.
Yeah, I think. Who do you think will be getting up to say a few words? Because I don't know if there is anyone that just doesn't know Derryn Hinch, or he hasn't had some sort of influence on. He's it's almost state funeral like.
Yeah, and I get the feeling,
Yeah, I mean,
certainly from what we're hearing, even over the events surrounding his death, I get the feeling he will have a very big say in who is speaking at his funeral. Like you get the feeling he wanted to go out in the way that he wanted to go out. He wanted it announced in the way that he wanted it announced. So I kind of feel, Shannon, like probably whoever it is will have been tapped on the shoulder in the last little while.
yes, I believe he said on another podcast that the Comedy Theatre, and I think Darren James might be the MC, but I don't know. I haven't heard yet.
A bit of Derryn James. He could do a bit
Yeah,
of
well,
Johnny
Darren
Funk.
James was like a son to him, really. I mean, he started off as Darren's panel operator, and then they travelled the world together doing things, but they've just remained tight for a very long time.
No, he's quite the character in himself, the Derryn James. Beautiful to hear the words from those that have worked close with him, and particularly in the times when I would say probably Derryn doing some of his best work, and that is something that you both can be very proud of, obviously as producers and supporters and of those programs, but being a part of his life at the time when he was doing what he does best. I know I've spoken to a lot of people about this as to what their thoughts around Derryn, and as many people, and you well and truly know, Kate, is that they're probably the people that won't necessarily feel the same way that you both have. But I enjoy the fact that I think we didn't hear enough of the behind the scenes as to how the man operated, how he got it together, because audience seemed to be, and I'll go to you on this, Shannon, is audience seemed to be number one to him. He understood it. He knew it. He wanted to be the very best Derryn Hinch that he could be to that audience.
And he was absolutely genuine about that. I mean, I was, grateful that I got to have lunch with him only a few weeks ago, and it was really sweet. People still walking past and saying, "G'day, Derryn," and he's always got time for people, not just on air and talking to talkback callers, but people that come up to him in the street. Like, he always has time to speak with people. He really cares about people. And that was, something I really admired in him.
Kate?
Yeah, look, totally, Nick. I think, he did things for lots of different reasons, right? He did things because he believed in them. He did things because he thought they were, might be good for people. I think, like Shannon said earlier, it is funny about, that idea of the battler and people that aren't going to be heard otherwise. I think you talked early on about where did he get those stories and what were the influences. We're sort of, everything's a little bit, compressed now, but he would read every newspaper back to front, and it was like it was those little stories that we might not even seen that he'd say, "Have you seen this? We need to talk about this." He just really, I think he was always he loved a yarn, he loved a story, he did want to do things properly. Yeah, he did want people to listen. And he wanted people to want to listen because it was good and it was compelling, and hopefully it was right. Yes, he definitely did things. I think to him it didn't matter if people weren't speaking to him because he did things for the reasons he did. For the ones around him, it was a bit like we like everybody. Like, I don't know anything about that. It was an interesting association at times, right? But you just had to kind of go, we're here to do our job, and we would put to wear what we felt right about as well. And sometimes there were things you couldn't help, right? And Shannon, when he was naming people on air that he wasn't allowed to name, and we had like a poor panel operator, lovely Mark Genn, she was an absolute legend, and you're like, kind of sitting there poised, ready. Could we maybe
Like that
pre-record this
jumper.
one?
Yeah,
Please? And
yeah.
even going
Yeah, we had
to rallies, like when he had, one of those rallies on the steps of Parliament, and you kind of went to support him, and he needed to do that thing, but at the same time, Nick, sometimes it wasn't right to me. So when
Yeah.
what you're doing is potentially breaking a suppression order, and he says to everybody, let's say that name, I went, no, because I don't actually, I don't agree on this one. Like, those suppression or probably more when it's contempt, right? If there is a case going on now and you might put that in jeopardy by naming someone, I don't know, but we could have those conversations. You just had to kind of, he did what was right for him, but that isn't always right for everybody else as well. And that was okay too.
Yeah, I had the lawyers on speed dial. I was consistently checking, getting his editorials checked, trying to find the ways that he could say what he wanted to say without, all
Getting
of us
in too
losing
much
our
trouble.
jobs. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you've done an amazing job, and I can hear it in your voices, the love for the man and for the jobs that you did. I want to leave you with this because I think this is one of the craziest things was when I did have lunch with him at Bistro Guillem at Crown Casino.
One of his faves.
Oh, well, I can see why, because he literally held court there. But we were probably midway through mains. Actually, we got past mains. Dessert was coming, but he said, "Let's get up. We've got to get a photo for the Hinchogram." And I said, "The Hinchogram? What's a Hinchogram?" I don't think even I was on Instagram at that point. He was all over it. Like, he just knew what was going on. I think I might have been, but I love the fact that he called it Hinchogram at the time. And you know what? It really shocked me that here I am standing to probably one of the great media, one of my great media idols, and probably legends of media that will ever sort of walk. And he's the one that wants to get a photo with me, and that didn't sit too well with me because I was in deep, complete shock. I walked away thinking this is 3 Christmases, 2 Easters, and 5 birthdays at once. Amazing man. I want one last question to you both. And if there was one thing that you look back at and the time that you've spent with Derryn, and if there was anything you could change, is there anything that you wouldn't? Is there anything in the time that you had with him that just sort of hits home that you'll be thinking about over the next couple of weeks as we sort of say goodbye in our own way? I'll go to you, Shannon, first.
I'm gonna miss him. We had been in contact since we worked together, and he was always good to me and always in my corner. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. The opportunity to have worked with him. We always had great catch-ups. He always loved the media, and I loved chatting to him about news and current affairs. And I think I'll always think of him fondly. We, as I mentioned earlier, we had some big. I know he had an enormous life, and I was only a very small component of that, but I was there when he got the liver transplant, and I took the call for the liver transplant, and that was just, a surreal time for me. I have lots of fond memories of working with Derryn. I think I'll always value that time.
And Shannon, don't ever let producers say they don't make good talent for radio. Producers make very good talent for radio. Well done, you. Kate?
Yeah, look.
Last thoughts, words?
It's interesting, I feel like a lot of the talk has been about, that Derryn that we all know from, mass media and TV and radio and all those things. And when I was first working with him, and after a little bit of extra coin, he got me to transcribe some of his old interviews that he was doing, possibly for Human Headlines. It was for a book, and it was his interviews with all of his old journalist mates. So people like Col Allen, who was editing papers in the US. And I sat there over a period of weeks and was listening to these conversations and these stories, and I went, this is like a whole nother Derryn. And if you think he was doing that, and he was doing that in the US in his early 20s, and he's just passed away at 82, in a way, it's hard to be sad because, what a life, what an
Yeah.
innings, what an amazing. And I think if people went back and, read some of those books and things, you wouldn't actually believe what he did and achieved before he was the Derryn you knew. So, it's, yes, Shannon, so sad. And I know you've spent more time with him. I just kind of go like, my takeaway thought is, what a life, what a big life, what a great.
Well, in the immortal words of Derryn Hinch, that's life. And he certainly lived an amazing one. And I think you can always judge someone's life on the impact that they've had on others. And to hear from both you, Shannon, and Kate, it's impressive. It's incredible that the effect that he has actually had on other people's lives, and so many Australians just are thinking now, the great man's gone. Will there ever be another Derryn Hinch? Well, not a chance. Not a chance indeed. And we've heard it all. Shannon Reid, thank you very much. Kate Stevenson, thank you so much for coming on to the Experts Podcast to share some of the behind the scenes with the great man, the human headline, Derryn Hinch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to the Experts Podcast. It is a sad chat, but it's also a celebration of a fantastic life in journalism. And a lot of the listeners here that we get to engage with will appreciate this behind the scenes chat with someone who was fighting for those that didn't have a voice so hard and so well. And there's a lot more people behind the great man, and we got to hear a couple more voices behind that. Look forward to having your company when we get to speak to another expert and another media next week. We'll see you then.